And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection, your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. In the fall of 2021, the BC government introduced the Clean BC Roadmap to 2030, a plan on making polluting more expensive and a shift from fossil fuels to clean alternatives more affordable. On today's Open Connection, we rejoin the nation-to-nation panel discussion, Energizing the Economy.
And when you're in an urban setting at night in the dark, and you're expecting that person to leave their car a couple of blocks from your apartment building to plug it in because there's not the sufficient electricity inside their underground parking at their apartment building. These are the kind of level of details that haven't, I don't think, been properly thought through. Again, it's about pacing and timing and proper planning and implementation, but trying to ram this through in such a quick order without really getting through these details, I worry will ignite a more significant backlash against what really is an amazing technology when it comes to performance and the cost savings potentially down the road and reducing emissions, which is what we all would like to see happen.
I got a different take on it. I got a take as a citizen making $60,000 a year, and I can't afford an electric car. I can barely afford a gasoline car. So my old 2010 Silverado that I own right now, my old beat up pickup truck, I'm gonna have to keep that on the road. We're gonna end up looking like Cuba. All those cars that were still there from the 50s, they just keep putting glue in it and tape because we can't afford electric cars, the infrastructure's not there. And by the way, if I try to go buy a new car to get my kids to school or go to a hospital appointment, I'm gonna get dinged with a $20,000 fine. This doesn't make any sense. Government, you got no infrastructure, you got no electricity supply, but you're forcing us to buy electric cars. You're putting us in a very bad spot when the cost of living is already so high. But when you read the news, there are really good solutions out there, and I don't know why we're not actually exploring them further, like say solar or wind. Can we make up the difference in terms of the energy needs, affordability, because we certainly reached the emission stage with it? Why are we not going all in to actually augment what we already have? Stuart.
Great question. And several fronts. On the automotive, I think there's a shift towards EVs as the absolute solution. And whenever you see governments picking the winner in anything, you can be almost certain that they'll be wrong. It happens every time. And in picking EVs as the winner, I think the fatal mistake here, and hey, I might be wrong on this, but I think down the road what we're going to see is actually consumers' desires are more what Barry's talking about. People want to have the hybrid vehicles. That's what they're buying more of. They're buying fewer EVs in many of the G7 markets right now. Even though China is trying to flood the world with cheap and good cars, battery cars, that I'm sure lots of Canadians would buy, but they won't be able to because of tariffs coming in to protect the automotive industry, which is a big thing for the government of Canada to support. The $20,000 fine coming in next year will apply to hybrid cars as if they are internal combustion cars fully, which seems to be to make no sense because what we're seeing is a long-term trend. We've seen it for decades of internal combustion cars becoming more and more efficient. And if you draw a line in efficiency increases, which I've done, to 2050, you would realize that if you had the same level of improvement of efficiency and lowering of emissions as a consequence, you would get probably 80% of the way towards lowering the emissions that we're told we're supposed to. And yet, the purpose of government right now seems to be to get rid of this improvable solution. Not perfect, but improvable. So that to me seems like a distortion that's been adopted into the sort of political system that will be sort of expunged by some purgative method, be it an election or just common sense coming into effect at some point. Consumers just simply aren't going to be doing things because they're told to. The stick government has on that is not big enough. I don't say that as one who's uninterested in a whole range of solutions, because I'm an all of the abover. A great example, and BC Hydro likes talking about this, is the fact that right now California is producing at certain times of the day a huge glut of solar power. It's pouring those electrons onto the grid, the same grid that we're part of because of geography. And there are parts of the day when the energy used by British Columbians comes more or less directly from California solar. But of course, the sun doesn't provide that all of the time, and then it falls off at other times of the day. So maybe there will be storage, or maybe you can think of as hydro as a sort of a storage conceptually for that solar, and that's a good thing. So
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Nuclear power is a low-carbon energy source, meaning it doesn't directly release greenhouse gases during electricity generation. However, the process involved in uranium mining, fuel fabrication, and reactor construction can have their own carbon footprints if fossil fuels are used. Additionally, nuclear power plants produce radioactive waste that requires long-term storage and poses potential risks if not properly managed. Let us return to the conversation as Stuart highlights other green energy solutions.
Is solar a thing for British Columbia? There's not many places. There's probably some. Solar's great in Alberta. They're building solar like crazy. If you want to build solar, go do it in places that have got all the right, metrics, which we generally lack here. Wind, I think there's offshore wind potential, but that's where politics gets into it. I think there needs to be, if there's to be that, I do remember the day you were in government, Barry. I was one of the chief editors at the Vancouver Sun. You guys came out with your clean energy plan. It was probably 2003 or 4, 5? Yeah. Anyways, all these maps came into the news and we were putting them up on the wall. It was like, okay, you got geothermal here, you got tidal energy there, you got all this, you got wind here. It all looked very exciting. Well, no geothermal has happened. I'm a fan of geothermal, it just hasn't happened yet. Tidal is going nowhere. I was just out at the Bay of Fundy in August looking at this ambitious project to take those high tides and turn them into energy twice a day. It's been shut down, there's graffiti on it, it's just a huge white elephant. And that's not happening here. Wind has happened, of course, Tumbler Ridge, and we have Vancouver Island, there's other spots. These resources are there. There's one that hasn't come up. I know we're probably going to talk about it, Elisa, and it is nuclear. It's something that I didn't think would come onto the agenda in BC because, well, number one, it's illegal to explore for uranium, which you need for nuclear. And secondly, it's also illegal in BC to develop nuclear energy, period. It's been outlawed, literally, by the BC government. I don't think even by the current government. I think it was outlawed under the social credit. Is that right? Yeah. So in Alberta, they're talking about nuclear, and this came up actually yesterday. I mentioned an executive from Alberta saying, yeah, we're going to be doing, we're looking at SMRs, that's small modular reactors, as a way to decarbonize the Canadian oil sands so that the emissions from them gets to where we all want it to be, and they can do it that way. So let's throw that out there if we want to talk about clean energy.
Ooh, just throw a bomb there right at the end. Nuclear bomb. So I'm prejudiced with nuclear energy because I was a treaty negotiator for my band for 8 years, and nuclear was a topic with Canada. And our issue with it was Canada had 100% authority. Didn't matter what First Nations thought or not. But when we're talking about the trilemma, you want energy that's dependable, you want it to be affordable, and you want it to be low emissions. Nuclear seems to be the only option that fits all three of those points. Barry, any thoughts?
Well, I would say it's not the only, but certainly one of a small number. we have large-scale hydro in British Columbia. It has environmental impacts for sure, but it is almost zero emission.
Except for methane.
Except for methane, which can be mostly dealt with at the time of construction if you do proper harvesting and clearing prior to the flooding that happens behind a dam and when you create the reservoir. 50 years ago, we didn't do such a good job of that, but we've learned, as we have with many other things. So in British Columbia, we do have that ability to generate electricity, but we need more, and we're not going to dam more.
But
most
yeah, exactly.
likely.
But the political climate, do you think another Site C can happen in BC?
So never say never. So I'll say, I have multiple answers. So I suggested to then Gordon Campbell that we needed to build a Site C dam, and he said absolutely never. He said just what you said. It'll never happen. British Columbians won't stand for it, and there's no way I would ever support it. That was circa 1997 or 98 when I was raising concerns about a proposed natural gas power plant close to where I lived in the Fraser Valley. It's called the Sumas 2 or SC2 project, just on the Washington State side of the border. And I said, as an alternative, we should suggest that BC Hydro will go ahead and build the Site C dam. And that's when he said, it'll never happen. I would never support it. Fast forward, 2010, he announced, we're going to build it. So things can change.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Survey feedback from consumers was a major factor in Industrial Revolution's drive towards mass production processes. As a result, feedback, quality standards, and product uniformity were established, demonstrating the increasing awareness that consumer demand influences industry production. Let us rejoin the conversation as Barry shares the results of an energy poll.
We commissioned a poll. We hired a company called Ipsos, a very reputable international polling firm. They surveyed over 1,000 British Columbians in August, and they asked people, if we need to generate more electricity, which we do, what would you like to see? 62% of British Columbians said that they're open to considering another large-scale hydro dam after Site C. Now, of course, once you get into the details, the numbers could drop after protests and things, but even after all the consternation and cost overruns and delays in getting Site C built, 62% of British Columbians are now saying they'd be willing to contemplate another one. When it came to nuclear, this was the bigger surprise for all of us, I think. 58% said that they're willing to consider removing the restrictions against nuclear power in British Columbia. 58%. When it came to wind and solar and geothermal, 82% said they're on side with more wind, solar, and geothermal if we can get that actually happening in British Columbia. They would like to see that happen. So it isn't always what you think, right? Public attitudes change over time, and it's subject to change.
In terms of energy questions, lead to more energy questions. We're going to switch gears here a bit, and we're going to go back to the Clean Action Plan of the BC government. And we were shocked a couple of years ago when the Business Council of BC produced a report using government numbers that talked about what was going to happen in BC if we followed the Clean BC plan. Stuart, I know you and Barry have been talking about this for a while, so any thoughts on that?
Well, it kind of comes back to something I said in my opening statement, which is that energy and the economy are kind of the same words. If you have less energy, you're going to have less economy. And the Clean BC plan, as far as I can tell when I look into the details, is a less energy plan, which means a less economy plan. So it's really just a straight line to say, well, I guess if we have less economy, that'll mean we have fewer jobs, or jobs that pay less, or we have less trade going on, we have lower GDP, and indeed this is what is shown in the economic research that I think was shared from this stage yesterday. You have that effect. I don't offer that to you because it's my opinion that having a Clean BC plan, which is a lovely marketing name. Yes, who doesn't want a Clean BC? Anyone doesn't want a cleaner BC? No. We all want a Clean BC plan. Who would speak out against such a plan with that great name? Well, it's actually, you could rename it, a lower energy or lower economy BC plan. It would be, a truthful name for it. And to tie that to a bigger trend, and I think this is super important. If you remember anything here today, well, hopefully it's, get this man to Ottawa. But the other thing I'd say remember is that what's going on now, if someone says there's a big energy transition happening right now, that's actually not true. There's no evidence for that. What's going on is here's the word for it. It's a totally different word than years and years of, I'm going to call it propaganda, has been trying to make you believe. Actually, what's going on is an energy addition. That's what's happening in the world right now. Energy is being added to humanity's life experience as the world seeks to live as we do in a place like Canada. The whole world is doing that. Everyone knows that. And they're doing it to a great extent by using more fuels, such as coal, to create electricity in their lives and other forms of energy. They're adding more. And that's not my idea. There's a journalist, energy specialist, Javier Blas, if you're taking names, you can look it up, has been writing about this idea of the energy addition as really the true thing. So when we start talking about it and thinking about it, and we want to be constructive, and we want to think about what it means for the economy, think about the fact that more energy is being added to the system. So what does that mean? How do we ensure it's as clean as it can be? How can I be sure that the test of the energy trilemma is satisfied? So I think this is the big challenge that I see. And when you bring it back down to, say, one subnational jurisdiction of 65 or so in North America, and that one is British Columbia, and we've got this obsession with the Clean BC plan, and we know that by the government's own numbers, it's going to reduce GDP by the equivalent of $11,000 for each household in the province by 2030, because there's probably 25 different measures if you go through the list. It's not one thing that's doing that. It's like all these different policies. One of them is the EV policy. And there's another policy, on July 30th of this year, the regulations for the amended Clean Energy Act came in. I think the media were all out at their cottages or something in Victoria because no one reported on the fact that's when the regulations came in that put the $20,000 fine on the conventional cars that you'll be trying to buy next summer. And by the way, you'll never pay those fines because the manufacturers just will stop sending those cars to dealers here because no one's going to pay a $20,000.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Formulas in a spreadsheet like Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets allow you to perform calculations and manipulate data by using functions and operators within cells to achieve the desired outcome. In this final segment of Open Connection, Stuart shares how sometimes you can get lost in the numbers.
The way to make the numbers, make that reduction to a $11,000 a household lower GDP by 2030 is to dictate that we use our private vehicles 25% less. That's right, 25% lower kilometers driven by British Columbians. There's someone with a spreadsheet in Victoria who's plugged that in, and at the bottom they want to see that reduction in emissions, which is a reduction in energy, which is a reduction in the economy, because it's all the same thing, right? Someone is running those numbers. So I think the big thing that's happened here is that the masters of Excel for Microsoft have been set to work to say, give us the numbers, give us the formulas, so that these targets that someone has signed a treaty for, so that we can go to Paris or places and say, hip hip hooray. That's really what's driving it. And that's just the world we're in. That's a comment on where we are. It's not so much an opinion, I don't think, for me.
On paper, in theory, yeah, that makes sense. But in reality, who among us are going to drive 25% less? It's not based in reality. In fact, if you look at the Clean BC program, especially the assessment done by Business Council BC, it contradicts what you are doing here today. First Nations are at the forefront of economic development at all levels. But the Clean BC program is saying, no, you can't do that. In fact, LNG Canada does not fit within the guidelines of Clean BC. Haisla Cedar LNG does not fit within the guidelines. But the politics is going to come out and say, oh, we're going to make amendments, we're going to make exemptions, we're going to make it fit. It can't fit because of the trilemma that Stuart already explained. Energy in today's context has got to be affordable, dependable, and low emitting. We haven't seen that yet. All we've seen is talk about electrified futures. So it's actually quite fascinating watching the politics collide with reality. Barry?
Yeah, I'd like to just piggyback on what Stuart mentioned, just a proof point. I've been watching statistics and reports from various U.S. entities that report on electricity. One of them caught our attention last Christmas. It's called the North American Electricity Reliability Corporation. Their job, it's a not-for-profit set up by the U.S. government after the blackout in the Northeast back in 2003, when 50 million people were left in the dark when transmission lines failed. So they take a hard look at utilities across North America because we are interconnected. A major failure here can cause a ripple effect down to California and into New Mexico, and vice versa. Toronto was in the dark as a result of that blackout in the Northeast United States. So there's a ripple effect. So anyway, they take a cold-hearted look every year at what utilities are doing. And for the first time ever, they rated British Columbia and BC Hydro at risk by 2026 of maintaining electricity reliability standards. And that standard is to have a 15% buffer to make sure you've got reserves available at a moment's notice to deal with unplanned outages. A power plant fails, transmission line gets impacted by a tornado or hurricane or an earthquake or ice storm, that you have a margin, and the margin that's considered adequate is 15%. And they're saying that by 2026, British Columbia is on track not to have that buffer, and it's because of the Clean BC policies of phasing out our limited amount of natural gas generation we still have in British Columbia. So this summer, because we're in a drought, we didn't have enough electricity, not only were we importing from outside, we were running our existing limited amount of natural gas power plants full tilt, including one on Vancouver Island, 275 megawatts, owned by Capital Power. So it's an independent power producer selling the electricity to BC Hydro because BC Hydro said, please run it. But under Clean BC, that's not to be allowed. So when that contract expires at the end of next year, BC Hydro has said, now we won't be renewing it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.